Song of Mornius, Chapter 34. Filrena started awake. Again she heard it, faint scratches at her door. Priestess? As the door creaked open, light spilled across the chamber. Gulgrin, his torch held high, ventured in. Water sloshed from the basin he carried, soaking the white tunic he wore beneath his robes. He stood braced against the wall beside the doorway, his eyes black pools staring down. She lay limp on her fouled mattress, her arms bound loosely to the post above her head. With one eye swollen and the other sealed shut with caked blood, she could barely track the movement of her apprentice as he shuffled toward her. "What's he done, Filrena?" Gulgrin asked in a strangled voice. "Everyone's wondering, why is he taking so long?" She watched him stiffen as the torchlight touched her face. "Oh!" He staggered back, crashing hard against the table. It toppled as its legs gave way. Method men's bloody tools clattered across the floor. Filrena stared at the ceiling and breathed hoarsely, her one eye hot, too heavy to hold open. She listened as carefully the table was straightened by Gulgrin's trembling hands. Metal clinked against wood as implements of torture were again arranged as they had been. Hands came to touch her wrists, to loosen the knots holding her. "He told me these aren't required anymore," Gulgrin said. "You are made ready for communion. The others are gathering in the chamber below." Filrena trembled as her apprentice's fingers stroked her arm. "It's true then? You're dying?" She wanted to answer, to curl up in a ball, to gouge men's eyes out with her bare hands, but darkness held her prisoner. It kept her safe, kept him out. She lay unresponsive, barely breathing while Gulgrin waited. "I guess so," he whispered softly. Arms slid under her bruised ribs, lowered her gently from the fouled mattress onto the floor. She felt the soothing coldness of stone against her bare body, absorbing the last of the warmth around her core. Above her head, the soiled mattress was lifted. Bits of straw landed on her face as he carried it out. "This'll be better, I think. See?" Gulgrin, talking more to himself than her, dragged the heavy replacement across the stone. She heard a soft thump as he dropped it onto the frame. Then she heard his robe rustle as he knelt by her side. "He wants me to wash you," he told her gently. "For the communion you must be cleansed so the rest will—" She heard him swallow nervously. "Be accepting to share in your blood." Filrena trembled as water dribbled across her skin. Slowly a cloth sponged its way down her body, tapping awkwardly at the crusted, scabbing places. "He's hurt you so much," Gulgrin whispered. Filrena stiffened as the rag did its work, drawing blood from old hurts she had almost forgotten. "I know suffering is necessary to please Malian, but this—" Gulgrin choked on his words. Filrena turned her head at the smell of her own mangled flesh. The bloody lumps on her ribs where her breasts used to be. Pain stabbed her with every breath from her shattered ribs, her fingers broken, the ends of which throbbed excruciatingly where her nails had been. Sharply she cried out as Gulgrin accidentally brushed her thumb. "I'm sorry!" he gasped, jumping to his feet. "Ow!" "Oh, Filrena!" His arms trembled still as she felt them sliding under her back. Gently he eased her up, laid her softly onto the bed. "I'm not going to retie you," he told her, whispering the words close to her ear. "They'll be coming for you, priestess." She heard him sobbing deep in his throat as his fingers touched her brow. "Your hurting will be over," he said softly, "very soon." He clutched at her arm, grinding splinters of the broken wrist he was unaware of. "I'm sorry," he breathed. "I have to go." Filrena shivered at a touch of cold air on her dampened skin. Above her, Gulgrin backed away. She heard him pause to retrieve his lantern, and then watched through the watery slit of her eye as the light went out. For a long moment she lay still, absorbing Gulgrin's words. Soon the drawer would open and the attendants would be there, ready to begin their work. The chamber was dark, like the barrier she huddled behind, the wall she had built in her mind that kept her safe. Felrina opened her one eye and stared toward the ceiling. Darkness was better. Men's worked in the light, as long as she could stay in darkness. Move! The angry voice cracked through the room like a lash. She blinked, struggling to see with her hot, sticky eye. This was not the Veelar spirit, heard only through her staff. This wasn't Malian either. Slowly she raised her head, muscles quivering along her neck. "He's left you untied," said the voice. "It's your one chance. Don't waste it." "Father?" Felrina raised her arm, rubbed her eye clear with the back of her hand. With all her strength she fought to move, to rouse her blood-starved body. Again she saw Mens with his short club in hand, walking slowly back and forth beside the bed, striking hard at her helplessness, again and again and again. Teeth gritted, Felrina dragged herself up, slid her legs over until her bare feet touched the floor. Felrina gasped as a vision appeared before her face, the figure of a Thalian warrior, his image bathed in a soft green light. She tasted blood as she struggled for words. Grimly the specter pointed at her wadded-up clothing. "Get dressed. I'm here to guide you out." "What?" She gagged at the sour taste in her mouth. Bending stiffly, she reached with twisted fingers for her leggings. "Argus," said the ghost, "you are near death, so you see me. Your death has called me here, a death which I seek to delay." Felrina cried softly at the pain from her broken fingers. Using her arms and teeth, she wriggled into the sleeves of the tunic, then ducked her head to shrug the rest over her mangled chest. "Faster!" Argus said. "Death is coming!" Trembling, Felrina shrugged on her cloak in much the same way, pressed her mangled toes inside her boots. Her leggings, she realized, she had no way to manage. She would have to go without them. "Come!" Argus flitted to the door. "Hurry!" Felrina staggered, groaning at her hurting deep inside. Beyond her chamber the tunnel was empty with the exception of her old fouled mattress. She stared out the doorway, blinking her one good eye enough to see. The image of the knight bobbed before her, close to the ceiling, his face clenched with hate. With a soft groan, Felrina sagged against the wall. It would be better to let them finish her. "Shall we let them skin you next?" The ghost hovered before her, his gaze blazing contempt, "because that's what he plans as his last hurrah before the communion, to humiliate you, skin you nice and slow in front of all your peers." She stumbled into the tunnel at last, hissing as the weight of her garments tore at the tatters of flesh above her ribs. Already blood splotched her tunic, trickled warm and wet down her heaving ribs. "Come!" The ghost gestured urgently. "This way!" She followed, groping blindly after his light into a tunnel rarely used. Her head bumped roots, dislodging soil that pattered down her neck. She hunkered low to slip into a dark cranny in the wall, a natural rift through the stone the ghost led her to. Now, at his urging, she crawled with her weight on her knees and palms, shattered fingers sinking in cold, clammy mud. In agony and exhaustion, she hunched over herself, sobbing. "Do you want revenge?" The ghost flitted close to her face. "Do you?" She cried miserably as she raised her head. Through her one good eye, she caught a sliver of daylight far above her head. "Hear me," the ghost said. "We are near the top. It's too cold up there for you to survive very long, but I needed to get you out. Now you must hide here and stay very quiet. I'll be bringing someone back with me, someone who can help." "No!" Felrina crawled forward toward the light. "No!" Spasms gripped her lungs, drove her face down in the mud, coughing helplessly. She paused, her body trembling with shock and pain. "Malian lives in the walls of this mountain. He'll know I'm here." The ghost was silent, brooding as she started again toward the light, crying out as every movement jarred her shattered fingers. "No," he muttered finally. Again he flitted past her head and stopped. Again his angry glare stopped her. "Look to your legs, my dear, you'll freeze out there." He flitted forward again, this time leaving her far behind his trail of green light. "I'll hurry," he called down as quickly he grew smaller in her sight. "Don't think about anything, that way he can't hear you." Hunkering down in the mud, Felrina groaned out words between her teeth. "How do you know?" "Oh, I know," he said fiercely, his face so far and obscured by the light now she could not see his expression. "The ways of your God and his servants are painfully known to me. Now be still." Felrina closed her one good eye. Shivering in the darkness, she drew herself into a tight ball of brokenness, imagining herself just as hard and unresisting, just as unfeeling as the stone. Pulling down her Sundercon fur, Avalar stared where she lay in Morriston's double-sized tent, staring in annoyance at the pearly face poking at her through the tent wall beside her. "What if I said," the ghost repeated more slowly, "I can lead you, right now, to Cameron's slayer?" Avalar raised her head, staring toward the door flap of the tent and the inky blackness showing through its cracks. In dismay, she rolled to her stomach, smacking at the pile of furs she used as a pillow. "I am sleeping, ghost," she growled under her breath as she sank back down. "Go away." "Cameron's slayer," sang Argus. "Not just any slayer, but Cameron's slayer. You remember him, don't you? Nice, kind voice, sparkling puppy dog eyes." "Stop it!" Angry now, Avalar flipped over onto her back and stared at the ghost's gray visage above her head. Then she blinked. "What do you want?" she hissed. "Did Leader Tarek send you?" Argus' lips pulled back in a mirthless grin. Again, in a blink, he hovered close. "What if I gave you a chance for what your heart longs for most? To kill Cameron's slayer with your own two hands? Would you return to your home then, giant? Would you go back to where it's safe?" "What I want most?" Avalar, sitting up, hugged her thick furry covering over her knees. "Are you such a soothsayer, then, that you can so discern my desires within me?" He shrugged. "Cameron's slayer," he said again softly. "She who held the knife, Avalar. I have found her for you. All you need do is follow me." Avalar surged to her knees and fumbled for her armor, her hands guided by a soft green light. Dried by the campfire, the leather of her leggings felt stiff in her hands, impossible to wriggle over her hips. She half fell, half stumbled from the tent. "Where?" She whispered the word as fiercely she tugged at her leggings. With a quick glance at the outline of the guard keeping watch, she bent to wind strips of fur around her feet, knees, and calves. Then she dropped to her knees and reached inside her shelter, drawing out her parka, then her scabbard with its heavy sword. Far. Argus flitted near her head, a 2 days' journey at least for a human. Not for me. Exhaling slowly, Avalar glanced at the trees around her, at the gleam of firelight in the Shan's dark eyes. Tethered near the 3 tents, the little beasts watched her in silence, flicking their furry ears. Avalar shifted on her feet, her eyes on the unmoving figure of the guard near the fire. "He's got his back turned," Argus hissed softly. "Now, giant." Following his light, Avalar thrust herself silently through the trees. Then, hitting the snow beyond, with all her strength, she ran. Wails rose from the misty darkness by the river, cries of pain and rage from her starving, dying people. And Cameron, almost she could see him in the snow's quiet shimmer, walking beside her below Tyrdawn's crystal arch, holding her hand and smiling at her. Cameron! She sobbed as she ran, raging the hatred she had bottled up inside, hatred for his killer, for the one who dared take his life. Her pulse throbbed in her neck, the pitch of her blood raising until it keened in her ears like a song. With every surge of her heart she raced faster, driven by her quickening blood and the magic of water beneath her feet. "Hold!" Argus flew beside her, waving a hand before her eyes. "Giant, hold!" She slammed to a stop and bent, straining for air. "How far have we come, Ghost?" she panted. "How far must we go?" "You can't reach her fast enough," Argus said. "The woman fails. She's fading as we speak." Abelard gripped her knees, shaking her head. "Fails? But I must!" Every muscle in her body was primed for violence. Her joints flamed for battle. "My blood is quickened," she rasped. "I will do to her what I must. Battle her until she is dead in my hands. She deserves it. Cameron's blood deserves it." The ghost floated before her, his face level with her eyes. "This was wrong of me," he said gruffly. "With this I thought I could persuade you to go home. I see you clearly. This will only hurt you after all." "Home?" Abelard straightened her spine. "Wait, there is a way to reach her. Watch." The dead knight flitted back and cocked an eyebrow. "Oh? Well, do tell." "Yes." She closed her eyes and inhaled, locking her breath behind her teeth. "Pony," she whispered. Then, brow furrowed, she concentrated hard. "He will come if I say I am ready." Argus considered her closely, his other brow climbing to join the first. "Ready for what?" Tears warmed her cheeks as she nodded. "To go home. If this is what it takes to strike a blow for Cameron, I will do it. I would do anything, even journey home if I must." Abelard raised her face to the stars. "Hear you, Pony? I am ready!" A brightness struck the snow she faced. Abelard stumbled back quickly, raising her hands to shield her eyes. Only in darkness could she see it, how his magic arrived before he did, a circular portal of shimmering, interwoven strands, reflecting the depths of his staff, depths from which he stepped forth. As he did now, his crooked lips smiling, she watched in dismay as he bowed and flared his wings. "I will go with you to Hothra," she said without preamble, "if you help me now." His smile held as he looked up. Dressed in the creamy white tunic he preferred and his furry white boots, he started toward her across the snow. "All these cycles, Grevelin's daughter, and still you fail to know who I am. No exchange of favors is necessary here. Come, show me where you wish to go." Abelard stared at his arm, the hand he extended her. His wind-disheveled wings lifted as if for flight. "Come, giant," he said again softly. She swallowed, eyeing his staff. "But your magic." Pony grinned at her expression. "Do you truly believe I would ever harm you?" Locking her gaze with his, Abelard stepped forward and touched his hand. Pony nodded his approval as her fingers engulfed his own. He lifted his staff and squinted into its glistening layers. "Now, spirit," he said softly, "guide me. Think of the place you have been." Argus moved to hover above the elf. Pony closed his eyes and nodded slowly. Then Abelard saw an expression flash across his face she had never seen before. For just the briefest of moments she read shock and contempt on his face. Shaking her head, she followed Pony's stare to the ghost above their heads. "It is not far," Pony said, in a voice that cracked with rage. "Abelard, now!" The forest wavered and slid sideways from her sight. In the staff shifting layers she caught a jumble of images, all the places the staff could take her in that moment if she wanted to go. Freedom Hall loomed above the high cliffs of Hothra, the light of the stars dappling its black crystal roof. Boats clogged Hothra's black water harbor, guarded by the greater ships anchored behind their sterns. She spotted a land she recognized only from her memories, a place of sunshine and farmland and simple fisher boats. Then the mines, a brief glimpse only that Pony flicked away with his hand. With a clench of his fingers, Pony mastered the staff, focusing it to the will of the traveler, the place he wanted and nowhere else. Rock dominated her vision, layers of red and brown stone forming a deep craggy hill. Gnarled skeletons of bluebark thrust out in every direction, their roots clenched deep through a network of clefts and fissures in the stone. She staggered on ground abruptly uneven beneath her feet, her unbalanced steps triggering an avalanche in miniature of little sliding stones. The elf mage gripped her left thigh, bracing her leg until she steadied. Then he retreated in silence to stand back among the trees. Confused, she started to follow. Pony? He turned and knelt, his wings furling over his back. I am not a part of this, he said softly. Do what you came to do, but know this. He shot her a glance. I do not approve. Here! Argus motioned to a small opening in the stone and then floated in. Avalar glanced down, watching him bob out of sight. Far in the rocks she heard the ghost's voice, but not his words. She gasped as a pain-like fire knifed in her belly. Power hummed beneath her feet, a magic familiar, yet not. Memories called from below, cried out from stains of blood beneath the mud and stone. Her body trembled with its need to run, to scream, to fight or flee. That's it. As Argus backed slowly from the tunnel, he directed his words inward. Drawing her sword, Avalar stood poised on the balls of her feet, her focus locked on the narrow crevice. A little more, Argus called. Looking back, he flashed Avalar a look of fierce triumph. Avalar stared at the ghost, at the open hatred transforming his face, utterly belying the softness of his words. This is not what I... She broke off and stiffened as a claw-like appendage appeared, trembling uncontrollably as it groped at the empty air. Even in the darkness, Avalar could see how the fingers bent strangely, how the skin appeared to be ripped away in patches across the wrist and palms. Unable to breathe, Avalar stood in rigid horror, watching as a human female slowly emerged in excruciating pain from the rocky cleft, her face and body covered with mud and something else. When the ghost light touched her, Avalar saw that it was blood. Please. Groaning, the woman slumped to her side, her ribcage heaving as she struggled for air. After a moment, she dragged her head from the rocky ground. Is someone there? Avalar clenched her sword with sweaty fingers. Her skin quivered above her ribs. Magic ached between her bones. Here before her was not only Malian's servant, but Cameron's slayer. Yet she lay damaged, sorely hurt, dying. Glancing at Pony, Avalar expected him to react, to take charge, but the wizard remained neutral, as silent as the falling snow, eyes gravely watching her. The woman lay like death, the snow turning dark around her hands. Avalar found herself glaring at Argus. Through the sketch of his image, she could see Warder's Fall to the north, the leagues of shattered hills where the warders had entered Talankai's sky. This is not what you let me think, she said to the ghost. There is no battle here. This woman is dying. Avalar! Argus flitted close, his hawk-like face livid. Stiff with rage, he gestured down with a chopping motion at the woman's head. This is Felrina Vlyn, Cameron's slayer. Do to her what I cannot. All those she has killed demand it. Avalar filled her lungs and struggled for calm. I am fully blooded, she gritted. You made me that way, and... Audibly she ground her teeth. I wanted battle, ghost! Combat! Not to destroy the helpless! I am a giant! Strike her anyway! Argus snarled the words in her face. Hear me if you can't hear them! Her victims are crying out to me as we speak, begging for her blood! You must slay her, giant! Avalar nodded slowly. With careful steps she moved around the woman until she could see her clearly. Thin ice glimmered on the dead branches above her head, touched by the early dawn. Her blood flamed through her muscles, making her forearms rigid and hard, extensions of the steel she held. Rise, she commanded sternly as she clenched her sword. Rise and let this be ended, Felrina Vlyn. She waited, glaring downward. The woman lay in a heap, her shattered hands twitching on the stone. Avalar bent, doubled her hand in the cowl behind the woman's neck, and hauled her upright. The human dangled in her grasp, her bloody face swollen, lips torn. Avalar stood trembling, her sword swinging like a statement of death at the end of her wrist. Felrina opened her eye. Tears dropped from its lashes to the snow. "Help me," she moaned again. "Please, he's going to kill me." "No," Avalar whispered the word. "No, it seems that task has fallen to me. You have the scent of death on you already, Felrina Flynn, the scent of old blood and slavery. This whole mountain reeks of it. First my people were taken, now your own." The woman slowly dropped her head. Wails climbed in her throat, the hoarse, frantic cries of a stricken animal. Stunned, Avalar lowered her sword. "You." Helplessly, Avalar turned toward the winged elf, pleaded with her eyes for his wisdom, his counsel. Within her grasp she held a creature desperate and dying, and she was a giant, born to defend the helpless. In her blood and bones rose the desire to protect, to render aid and give comfort. Combined with her quickened blood, every fiber in her body primed for violence and battle. Her head thrown back, Avalar howled. Pony hurried toward her, his violet eyes wide with concern. "Avalar!" He stopped at her side, peering upward at her face. "Giant, what shall you do?" She looked at Argus. Lines furrowed the sides of his mouth, emphasizing his haggard expression. It was as if he relived his own final pain or suffered the torment from other, newer deaths. Half-seen muscles flinched around his eyes. His hands, knotted at his sides, trembled for his sword. "I know not," she said at last. "Oh, Pony, hear her." "Hush." Pony loosened her fingers, extricated her sword, and placed it on the snow as if it were weightless. With gentle hands he took the woman from Avalar's grasp, calmed her cries with a single touch of a finger to her forehead. Then he lowered her to the ground. "Burned?" he said, running his fingers in the air above her blistered legs. Gently he slid his hand under her tunic, touched his fingers to undamaged skin below her ribcage. "Broken," he said, "hands, fingers, arm. She bleeds inwardly. Her organs fail. He shook his head. And over her ribs he stayed his hand, held it inches above her bloody tunic. Slowly Pony lowered his head, his hands trembling as he rubbed at his face. "Barbaric," said Pony softly. "Avalar," he said, looking up, "this is not your decision, Grevelin's daughter. Cameron was Tarek's brother. This decision belongs only to him." Shivering, Avalar nodded, relieved to have it out of her hands. Beneath her feet the stone grieved softly, stained forever by loss and blood. If the woman must perish, let it not be here, she thought, not among the bones of my people. As she retrieved her sword, her gaze shifted north again to the crushed horizon beyond the cliffs, the pitted, ruined landscape beneath the silvery dawn. Avalar watched as Pony gently lifted the woman. Catching the silent command in his eyes, Avalar stepped forward and gripped his shoulder. She strained to focus through her tears the way he did through his crystal, to glimpse beauty in a land where there was none.